Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm going to be creating this cool call out title. I found this on videohive.net. It's right here. This is a cool video that has lots of different types of call outs. You can see that they stay attached to parts of this video behind it. And it's very unique. I've seen this a lot lately and I thought it would be a cool title to get into. As always, please watch this full screen. I'm creating this video so that you're watching it full screen HD. And then just a word of warning, this is going to be a little bit of a longer tutorial just because it takes a while to get through all the different elements that's going on in this video. So let's get straight to it. So in After Effects, I'm going to open up a new composition. So I'm just going to call this call out 2. The settings 1920 by 1080. We can do whatever we want, but that looks good for me. And I'm just going to make it 5 seconds. Okay, so now I have a new composition and I'm just going to add a background to it. I refinished this wood table this past week. It started out with white paint and now it's this beautiful wood, and so that's what we're going to be using as our background. So let's just put that as a background so we can see what we're working with. Okay, now let's start with the circles. So I'm going to go up to my shape tool, select ellipse, make sure that fill is turned off. We'll set the stroke to 10 and we'll just create our first circle. Something like that. Then we'll go into the ellipse and then we will go into transform ellipse and scale, and we'll just scale it from 0 to 100. Okay, so that grows like that. And then we want to add that small dot in the middle. So what we're going to do is just duplicate this ellipse. We'll call this dot. We will press U to bring up the keyframes. And in the second keyframe, we'll just go down to something like 32%. And then what we'll also do is go back to the ellipse, or the dot, and with it selected, we're just going to change the fill to have a solid color, and we're going to change that to white, and then turn off the stroke. So now we have the dot growing and the ellipse growing. And I'm just going to offset the dot growing a few frames so it pops up a little bit later. Okay, so now I'm just going to take this whole layer, move it over here to the top of this little shelf handle, and then I'm going to rename this shape layer dots. Okay, the next step is creating that line that is popping out from it. So let's just take our pen tool with our fill turned off and our stroke at 10. Let's just create a line going from the center of that dot down and then over to the left. So then we're going to rename this line. And if we go down into the properties, click this add button, and then click add trim paths, we can go into the trim paths and add that right on effect. So let's set a keyframe for the end at 100%. We'll put this at about 2 seconds, and then drag this back to 0. Okay, so now this draws on to our screen. That's pretty cool. Let's make sure it's all the way at 0. There we go. Cool. Okay, so let's go back to our video just to see what we have to do now. Okay, so now we have, let me just solo these layers, rectangle outlines. So now we have, let me show you these. So now we have these two outlines that are kind of flying in and rotating around the frame of this title. So let's get to our title call out 2. Okay, so now let's create a rectangle with our rectangle tool. We're just going to have the stroke be 5, and then just create a rectangle. Make sure that none of these layers are selected, and we're creating a new shape. Something like this is perfectly fine. We're going to call this rectangles, And again, go to Add, Trim Paths. Under Trim Paths, we're just going to decrease to about 20. And then we're going to offset like this, and maybe even further. Decrease to 8 and offset, so we just have this little corner. Okay, then we're going to animate this. So set a keyframe for start, end, and offset. And then it just takes a little bit of playing around to get what you want. Now we don't have to replicate this exactly, so we're going to grow it to around the top. So now we go forward a second or so and make this 8% to all the way to about here, 67. And then about here, we're going to move this keyframe for the start, and then about a second forward, move this all the way to 67. So now it's actually animating off. It starts, it grows, it rotates, and then it animates off. See that? Okay, we're going to actually move these trim paths into this rectangle layer, duplicate by hitting Command D on our keyboard, going down to our trim paths, deleting all these keyframes, and now just rotating. So let's rotate it and cut off make it a little bit shorter, rotate it so it's just the bottom of this line. Okay, so now we're going to do, this is fine for now, we're going to set keyframes for all of these, then we're going to move forward about a second, grow it to the left, and what we're actually going to do with this one first is shrink it a little bit, so go under your transform, scale, and just make it wide, a little bit smaller height-wise and a little bit smaller width. Okay, so now we can see it's a little bit smaller than this other one, and we have it growing to the left, and let's just rotate it a little bit more as it's growing, so you can see here what it does. And so that's a little bit different than what we did before, but it's gonna look cool. And then just take this end all the way to 85. And then move the start of the end up a little bit. So something like that's pretty cool actually. Okay, so now let's see what else we have to do. So now we're going to add these flying lines that are going across. So there's a couple different ways to do this, but one that I found was relatively easy. So if we just go about here so we can see where the ends of our rectangle will be, just create a few shapes with the fill being set to solid and the stroke to 0. We're just going to create a few rectangles. Something like this, one. And then unclick this layer to create a new shape layer. And we're going to do skinny. It doesn't really matter where they are right now. A little bit fatter, shorter, and then a block. Okay, so now we're going to select all of these, press P on your keyboard to bring up position, set a keyframe, move them all the way past the right side of this rectangle that is spinning around, and then go forward about 2 seconds or so and move it all the way past the right of it. And then offset these. So first we'll have this big block at the bottom, then the middle one, then how about this top block, and then this last semi-fat one in the middle. Okay, so they go all the way across, and we're gonna just move all of these up a little bit. Okay, something like this. Maybe speed it up a little bit. Take these last keyframes, move them forward. Okay, now we're going to take our shape tool again. First we're going to pre-comp this, so select all of those layers, Command-Shift-C. We're going to call this rectangles. Actually, that's a little confusing, so we'll call this flying rectangles. And then we're going to take this shape tool, make sure nothing's selected, and create a rectangle that's about the size of our title card, something like this. Okay, then we're going to go over here and under track matte, hit alpha matte shape layer 1 for the flying rectangles layer. What this does is create a mask so the rectangles only appear right here within that rectangle we just created. So that's kind of cool. Okay, then we're going to actually create the rectangle background where our text is going to appear. So again, with our rectangle tool selected, let's just create a new shape. What we actually can do is just duplicate this layer right here. Make sure we turn it back on because it's not a track matte. We'll call this background title 1. We're going to move the anchor point, so hit Y on your keyboard. Oops. Hit Y to get your pan behind tool and move it to the right because it's going to be growing from the right. And then go to size or scale, pressing S on your keyboard. Set a keyframe right there for 100% and move this to about 3 seconds. And we're going to play with the keyframes in a second, but unlock the width and height constraint properties and then shrink it to the right. So set that at 0. So we're going to move this keyframe a little bit past when these flying blocks come about. Something like this. And then we're just going to slow it down into this last shape. So we're going to add easy ease, select that keyframe, hit F9 on your keyboard, go into your graph editor, we're going to ease it a little bit more. And that looks pretty good. Okay. So then we're going to duplicate this shape. Actually, let's just make sure it's in the perfect position. I'm just going to move it up an inch and over to the left. So something like this. And then we're going to duplicate this shape. Now it's background title 1 or 2. Move this down. I'm holding shift while I'm holding it down so it locks it to this axis. And then press U to bring up the keyframes. So here we're going to shrink both the height and the width, something like this, maybe even a little bit skinnier. And we're actually going to move it up then. So select it, move it up, then go back to this first keyframe, delete it, and then set it back to 0 so that it grows from here. And I'm going to take off this easy ease right here just by holding command and clicking it. And then select that layer, change it to, this one will be black. Duplicate this layer one more time, press U to bring up the keyframes, move it down. Let's change the color to something like that orange we had. Ooh, that's pretty ugly. Let's make it a little bit prettier, something like that. Get the final size that we want. So we're again on this last keyframe, setting the size, something like that. Then going to the first keyframe, deleting it, and then setting it back to 0. And now we can offset these. Again, delete this easy ease, so command click. So now we're going to just offset by a few frames so they grow on one at a time. So let's just RAM preview this to see what it's looking like. So I think that's going to look pretty good. It's a little bit slow. Well, no, when you play it in full speed it looks good. But we don't want to see these rectangle corners right here, so we're going to just turn them on right before they start moving. So just select the flying rectangles and hit Option left bracket to cut that layer to start right there. Oop, not the flying rectangles, the rectangles. Okay, so now they pop on and start growing automatically. With this line, I'm going to have it go a little bit faster. Press U on your keyboard to bring up the keyframe and make it grow a little bit faster. And I'll maybe ease it to the last point, to its resting point as well. Okay, so now the last thing we have to do is add our text. So it's a pretty simple typewriter effect, but it's backwards, and that might be a little confusing for those of you that don't know how to do it. So let's take our text tool, let's just type something. We'll just call this, well, what do we call it over here? Pine wood, because that's the type of wood that we used, or that we bought this table. So pine wood, sorry, my English gets a little bit worse as these tutorials go on. We're going to make it this orange color just to tie in that color. Just change the size so that it fits this box a little bit better, something like that. Then we're going to take our typewriter tool, as you can see I already brought it up, drag it onto this text layer. Press U to bring up your keyframes. We're going to delete this empty text layer that popped on when I did that. Okay, so now we have these keyframes under range selector, but if you open up the range selector, you'll see there's a start and an end. We're going to want to go from the end to the beginning, basically. So I'm just going to delete these keyframes, set the start to 0, and now you will see if I decrease the end, it basically types on backwards. So starting from about here, when the white block starts zooming onto our screen, set a keyframe for the end at 100%. When it ends, we'll go to 0. Then just scrub through this, make sure that it comes on at the right time, maybe a little bit faster, and that looks good. So that's basically what you have to do for the rest of these, and I'm not going to go through each of the titles because that's how you do it. The last thing I want to teach you how to do is to add a little bit of motion to this. So first, let's add motion to the background. We'll edit the scale and position. So this is just an image, but maybe it's a video in the background. Put those at the start of the composition. We'll increase the size to 45 and raise it up a bit. Well, maybe not that much. And then move it to the left. So just subtle, maybe make it a little bit bigger so we can move it to the left a little bit more. Okay, and then we'll start it on the screen as well. Okay, so it grows like that. So what we want to do is have this dot and this line follow this handle. So there's this kind of easy way to do this. So what we're going to do is just add a couple keyframes to the dots and to the line. So if we press position for the dots and then set a keyframe right there and just move it to, you can see where it is going to pop up right there to the corner, top corner of this handle. So see, it pops up right there. And then at the end, let's just move these keyframes all the way to the right. So at the end of our 5 seconds, we're going to take this dots and just move it to follow the top of this handle. Now I can't just do that with this line, so that looks pretty good. It looks like it's tracking that motion, but it's just with 2 keyframes. It'd be a little bit harder with video if you're trying to follow something in a video though. So with this line, I can't just move it. I actually have to move just one point in this line. So if I go into the line, contents, shape layer, path, I select the path, then I could select individual points in the path, set a keyframe. Oh, I just want the one point. So make sure just this path is selected, not the path down here. Move this down here, and then go to the end of our composition and move it up here. You will see that it follows that dot, and we could RAM preview it out. So now you can see, and I could go in this and tweak this to make it absolutely perfect, but it looks like it's following that line, which is pretty cool. So this is the call out effect, and I'm going to actually include this template so that you can download it. So if you're watching this on YouTube or wherever, check out the links down below where you can get the free template for what I just created and have fun with it. I hope this tutorial was fun for you. It was a bigger one. I haven't done one of these in a while, but please, if you see tutorials or things that you want to learn online, just send it over to me, and if I know how to do it, I'll create a tutorial for it. Okay, enough blabbering from me. I'll see you over at videoschoolonline.com, and I'll hopefully see you in another tutorial.